All right, notes from a native son. Why did I choose this book to do this reading? Well, uh, for the past few weeks, I've not wanted to take too much attention away from what's been going on with the protests and everything. Um, doing some party trick like this. I don't know if it is going to be a party trick to read um, with my feet like this. We'll see. Um, but either way, James Baldwin, the guy that wrote this, well, I discovered this book on my bookshelf just a couple days ago, and being called "Notes from a Native Son," I thought it was about First Nations issues. I didn't realize James Baldwin wrote it, and I quite like James Baldwin. I first saw him in the movie "I Am Not Your Negro" a couple of years ago, and I thought that he was just very articulate, very willing to be frank, and I think uh, that's the mark of a very good mind, very interesting mind. So the reality is with this, with holding the book like this, I don't know that I can do this for very long. I don't know that I can turn pages. I haven't tried yet. But basically, I just posted a picture on Instagram yesterday, and people were like, how much can you do? And I was like, I don't know. Let's see. So I'm going to read this out. I was born in Harlem 31 years ago. I began plotting novels at about the time I learned to read. The story of my childhood is the usual bleak fantasy, and we can dismiss it with the retrained observation that I certainly would not consider living it again. In those days, my mother was given to the exasperating and mysterious habit of having babies. As they were born, I took them over one hand and held a book with the other. The children probably suffered, though they have since been kind enough to deny it, and in this way I read Uncle Tom's Cabin and A Tale of Two Cities over and over again. And in this way, in fact, I read just about everything I could get my hands on except the Bible. Probably because it was the only book I was encouraged to read. See, I'm relying too much now on the ball, and I actually don't want that. Come on, then. I must also confess that I wrote a great deal, and my first professional... I gotta get my toes up to the top, I guess? Okay. Oh, it's hard. Hard angle there. Come on, then. Maybe down a little bit more. And my first professional triumph, in any case, the first effort of mine to be seen in print, occurred at the age of 12 or thereabouts, when a short story I had written about the Spanish Revolution won some sort of prize in an extremely short-lived church newspaper. I remember the story was censored by the lady editor, though I don't remember why, and I was outraged. It's interesting. Chomsky wrote one of his first... he claims it was his first political essay at the age of 10 that was about Spanish Civil War as well. Also wrote plays and songs, for one of which I received a letter of congratulations from Mayor LaGuardia, and poetry about which the less said, the better. My mother was delighted by all these goings-ons, but my father wasn't. He wanted me to be a preacher. When I was 14, I became a preacher, and when I was 17, I stopped. Very shortly thereafter, I left home. For God knows how long, I struggled with the world of commerce and industry. I guess they would say they struggled with me, and when I was about 21, I had done enough of... Okay, so here we go. Here we go. Can I do a page flip like this? I don't think so, but we will see. Okay. I think I've got a page. Oh, go on. Is it? It is. Okay, all right. Okay. Oh, I'm going to chew this book up at this rate. All right. Great. Novel to get a Saxon Fellowship. When I was 22, the fellowship was over. The novel turned out to be unsaleable, and I started waiting on tables in a village restaurant and writing book reviews, mostly as it turned out, about the Negro problem, concerning which the color of my skin made me automatically an expert. Did another book in company with photographer Theodore Peletowski about the storefront churches in Harlem. This book met exactly the same fate as my first fellowship, but no sale. It was a Rosewood fellowship. By the time I was 24, I had decided to stop reviewing books about the Negro problem, which by this time was only slightly less horrible in print than it was in life, and I packed my bags and went to France, where I finished, God knows how, Go Tell It to the Mountain. Any writer, I suppose, feels that the world into which he was born is nothing feels that the world into which he was born is nothing less than a conspiracy against the cultivation of his talent. Yeah, I can agree with that. Which attitude certainly has a great deal to support it. On the other hand, it is only because the world looks on his talent with such a frightening indifference that the artist is compelled to make his talent important. Interesting. Okay. So that any writer looking back over even so short a span of time as I am here, I am here forced to assess, finds that the things which hurt him and the things which helped him cannot be divorced from each other. He could be helped in a certain way only because he was hurt in a certain way, and this help is simply to be enabled to move from one conundrum to the next. One is tempted to say that he moves from one disaster to the next. When one begins to look for influences, one finds them by the score. I haven't thought much about my own, not enough anyway. I heard that the King James Bible, the rhetoric of the storefront church, something ironic and violent and perpetually understated in Negro speech, and something of Dickens' love for bravura, not heard that word, have something to do with me today. But I would stake my life on it, but I wouldn't stake my life on it. Likewise, innumerable people have helped me in many ways, but finally, I suppose the most difficult and most rewarding thing in my life has been the fact that I was born a Negro and was forced, therefore, to effect some kind of truce with this reality. Truce, by the way, is the best one can hope for. One of the difficulties about being a Negro writer, and this is not a special pleading, since I don't mean to suggest that he has it worse than anybody else, is that the Negro problem is written about so widely. The bookshelves groan under the weight of information, and everyone therefore considers himself informed. And this information furthermore operates usually, generally popularly, to reinforce traditional attitudes. Of traditional attitudes there are only two, for or against, and I personally find it difficult to say which attitude has caused me the most pain. I am speaking as a writer from a social point of view. I am speaking as a writer. From a social point of view, I am perfectly aware that the change from ill will to goodwill, however motivated, however imperfect, however expressed, is better than no change at all. Oh, no. Oh, no. Come on, then. Come on. But it is part of the business of the writer, as I see it, to examine attitudes, to go beneath the surface, to tap the source. From this point of view, the Negro problem is nearly inaccessible. It is not only written about so widely, it is written about so badly. It is quite possible to say that the price a Negro pays for becoming articulate is to find himself at length with nothing to be articulate about. You taught me language, says Caliban to Prospero, and my profit on't is I know how to curse. Consider the tremendous social activity that this problem generates imposes on whites and Negroes alike. The necessity of looking forward. Consider the tremendous social activity that the problem generates imposes on whites and Negroes alike the necessity of looking forward, of working to bring about a better day. This is fine, keeps the waters troubled. It is all, indeed, that has made possible the Negro's progress. Nevertheless, social affairs are not, generally speaking, the writer's prime concern. Whether they ought to be or not, it is absolutely necessary that he establish between himself and these affairs a distance which will allow, at least for come on then. I guess the fact that my feet are sweating helps me turn the pages. That's good. Don't want to get too reliant on this ball, but I don't have the coordination to do it without it yet. Okay. For clarity, so that before he can look forward in any meaningful sense, he must be allowed to take a long look back. In the context of the Negro problem, neither whites nor blacks, for excellent reasons of their own, have the faintest desire to look back, but I think that the past is all that makes the present coherent, and further, that the past will remain horrible for exactly as long as we refuse to assess it honestly. I know in any case that the most crucial time in my own development came when I was forced to recognize that I was a kind of bastard of the West. When I followed the line of my past, I did not find myself in Europe, but in Africa. And this meant that in some subtle way, in a really profound way, I brought to Shakespeare, Bach, Rembrandt, and the stones of Paris to the cathedral at Chartres, and to the Empire State Building a special attitude. These were not really my creations. They did not contain my history. I might search in them in vain forever for any reflection of myself. I was an interloper. This was not my heritage. At the same time, I had no other heritage which I could possibly hope to use. Okay, time to move the foot up. And okay. Come on then. Come on. I would certainly have been, I had certainly been unfitted for the jungle or the tribe. I would have had to appropriate these white centuries. I would have to make them mine. I would have to accept my special attitude, my special place in this scheme. Otherwise, I would have to place in any scheme. I would have no place in any scheme. What was the most difficult was the fact that I was forced to admit something I had always hidden from myself, which the American Negro has had to hide from himself as the price of his public progress, that I hated and feared white people. This did not mean that I loved black people. On the contrary, I despised them, possibly because they failed to produce Rembrandt. In effect, I hated and feared the world, and this meant not only that I thus gave the world an altogether murderous power over me, but also that such a self-destroying limbo could never hope to right. Yeah, I can relate to that. Come on, then. One writes out of one thing only, one's own experience. Everything depends on how relentlessly one forces from his experience the last drop, sweet or bitter, it can possibly give. This is the only real concern of the artist, to recreate out of the disorder of life that order which is art. The difficulty then, for me, of being a Negro writer was the fact that I was in effect prohibited from examining my own experience too closely by the tremendous demands of the very real dangers of my social situation. I don't think the dilemma outlined above is uncommon. I do think, since writers work in the disastrously disastrously explicit medium of language that it goes a little way towards explaining why, out of the enormous resources of Negro speech and life, and despite the example of Negro music, prose written by Negroes has been, generally speaking, so pallid and so harsh. Oh, using the ball again. Come on. Clumsy. Oh, come on. Okay. Okay. Where's so pallid and so harsh? I have not written about being a Negro at such length because I expect that to be my only subject, but only because it was the gate I had to unlock before I could hope to write about anything else. I don't think that the Negro problem in America can be even discussed coherently without having in mind its context being the history, traditions, customs, the moral assumptions, and preoccupations of the country. In short, the general social fabric. Appearances to the contrary, no one in America escapes its effects, and everyone in America bears some responsibility for it. I believe this the more firmly because it is the overwhelming tendency to speak of this problem as though it were a thing apart. But in the work of Faulkner, in the general attitude and certain specific passages of Robert Penn Warren, and most significantly in the advent of Ralph Ellison, one sees the beginnings, at least, of a more genuinely penetrating search. Mr. Ellison, by the way, is the first Negro novelist I've ever read to utilize in language and brilliantly some of the ambiguity and irony of Negro life. Yeah, I really liked The Invisible Man. It was very good. About my interests, I don't know if I have any unless the morbid desire to own a 16 millimeter gotta get better at flipping these pages. There we go. 16 millimeter camera and make experimental movies can be so classified. Otherwise, I love to eat and drink. It's my melancholy conviction that I've scarcely ever had enough to eat. This is because it's impossible to eat enough if you're worried about the next meal. Yeah. And I love to argue with people who do not disagree with me too profoundly, and I love to laugh. Yeah. I do not like bohemia or bohemians. I do not like people whose principal aim is pleasure, and I do not like people who are earnest about anything. I don't like people who like me because I'm a Negro. Neither do I like people who find in the same accident grounds for contempt. I love America more than any country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. I think all theories are suspect, and the finest principles may have to be modified or may even be pulverized by the demands of life, and that one must find, therefore, one's own moral center and move through the world hoping that this center will guide one aright. I consider that I have many responsibilities, but none greater than this: to last, as Hemingway says, and get my work done. I want to be an honest man and a good writer. That is the foreword of Notes from a Native Son by James Baldwin.